RSAC 2026 Conference, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. Be there March 23rd through March 26th. Secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG26.
And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining Cybersecurity. I'm Sean Martin, your host, where I have the pleasure of having conversations about a topic that I love. Years and years, I've been working on security, from protection and detection and response, and looking at things from an operational perspective. And I've landed in a world where I believe security has a chance to do good things for the business, not just be a department of know and of controls, but to actually help drive business value and protect the growth and the revenue that it generates. And not an easy task if you're sitting in the CISO seat. And my guest today sat in that seat for quite some time at some organizations you probably are familiar with. Roland, how are you, my friend?
Sean, I am fantastic, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I forget when we chatted last, but it was a good conversation, and I'm happy we have a chance to connect today. We're gonna be looking at executive and employee protection programs and kind of what that means from a security leadership perspective and a business perspective, and some of the things you're seeing and hearing in that world, and perhaps how organizations and security leaders need to think about that stuff. So excited to have that chat. Maybe a few words about the things you've done in the past that led you to where you are now, where you're up to at the moment.
Sure. Well, 30 years go by really, really quick, Sean. I think what's interesting is that I actually started out on, quote unquote, the other side. So I came from the Air Force and their security police and anti-terrorist division. And that migrated into civilian law enforcement, federal law enforcement. And then I got a lot of cases that happen to have security risk and privacy issues associated with cyber and data and all that cool stuff. So I actually went back to school to learn about cyber. And the next thing I know, I fell in love with cyber. And second career, 20 years later, chief security officer for EMC, for ADP for a decade, ByteDance, and for the last few years before coming into advisory roles, supporting other chief security officers and CISOs in their roles. I get to do a lot of stuff. And one of my passion areas, of course, is being a converged security leader. Wrote a book on it, and it has been part of me helping other organizations for the past several years.
Yeah, it's a good natural way, I feel, to establish a relationship with people and then get an understanding of what's going on, big picture, driven by real stories, reality, right? So what are some of the things you're seeing organizations struggle with that maybe not every organization realize they should be struggling with, or may not realize they are struggling and can't put their finger on what it is?
So, typically there's really three flavors of this. Two are from the CISO side, and one's typically from general counsel side when I'm working with customers in this area. And the first is an emergent issue that happens with a business. Someone threatens an executive, the CEO, the workplace violence issue. I mean, it could be one of several different things. A travel security issue with a lack of operational expertise in place. And they turn to the CISO and say, you do this stuff for a living. Why don't you help us and make sure we're doing this right? And so it becomes, sometimes a sense of urgency to figure out what an organization should be doing at what level. And there's often, the normal knee-jerk reaction and then, a pragmatic review. And the second flavor is when it comes in a not urgent way, but a CEO or the executive leadership team turns to a security executive on either side and says, we'd like to streamline. We have cost things we'd like to do, and I'm tired of two different security leaders coming to me with two different sets of risk metrics, priorities. I want one throat to choke or one back to pat, depends how you look at it, and figure it out and create something that makes sense for me. And the third one is not much different. It comes from normally non-security practitioners on either side. It comes from the CEO or general counsel that says, I'm being asked questions from the board about our ability to protect our executives, resiliency, and threats to the business, their security, and I don't think we have a good handle on it. And I would like an external view that has done this before for large companies to help us figure how to do that. And that has been, kind of over the last, call it 3 years or so, the majority of the cases that have come to me.
And so how, I guess, my question is how, as with many things, early days of cyber, and I think executive and high level employee protection programs, it's kind of a fairly new concept in the grand scheme of things. Security is not new, but it's relatively new compared to a lot of other things. And I'm wondering, do organizations recognize this risk, or are they waiting to hear that their counterpart at the next business next door had an issue, or some news element finally makes the mark that catches their attention? What's the awareness of this, I guess, is the question.
I think it's becoming more and more aware since the attacks on some business executives in the United States a couple of years ago and ongoing cases around threats to people of high net worth. I think it becomes a consistent message. And quite frankly, the level of violence perpetrated as well as attacks through technology on identity and, whaling and all the other things that we've seen around BES type issues, it just kind of all accumulates at the same time. I think convergence, in my opinion, of course, I'm slightly jaded, but is super important when you think about our responsibilities as business protection executives, right? Our jobs around ensuring the continuing operations and capability and the leadership and the go-to-market of a business or an agency or whatever we do. And some of that is cyber, some of that is resiliency, and some of that is resiliency and availability of the people involved in doing it. And so it all mixes together. And I think from my standpoint, from my purview, is that we often think it's cost lever, right? Often businesses will push in this direction and say, I don't need a CISO and a CSO and a director of corporate security and this and that. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But I think a lot of people immediately go to a cost. And there's obviously cost multiples that make sense. It is the leveraging of the expertise on both sides as a force multiplier. And I'll give you a couple examples. So most people, especially in what we do, understand that physical security and facilities defense and public safety now has a lot of technology embedded. And whether it's gates and guards, it's technical security, whatever you want to call it, or it's the management of certain intellectual property defense, or it's, our phones or what have we. There's an aspect of technology involved in physical security. And our DevSecOps and our engineering teams have been doing this stuff for a long time. So giving them yet another discipline to add from the SOC or the CERC or, the threat intel platform or, an operational control platform or what have you, to saying physical security device control management, PSIM integration, it makes sense, right? You have a set of engineers that can provide a set of services in the existing infrastructure architecture that they know, lead, and manage. And so you get a better quality product faster to a global initiative. Typically, these companies are global. Secondly, you get a better threat picture. I mean, at the end of the day, you get a better threat picture, right? Because there can be a threat to the business, but as often you can have threat to people and the implications of that. So are people trying to steal data through an individual? Are they trying to get through their homes into corporate devices, or just get information to hold them hostage in some way, or blackmail them? I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at this. I've seen companies have up to 4 different threat management platforms for their company, including cyber, executive, brand, and customer, right? And they all report differently. There's no single threat view, and there's no team working all the threats. Again, it gives you this ability to consolidate the data to become a real true force multiplier in seeing that visual picture, that threat, and then being able to prioritize those risks. If I go in with a clear picture about a totality number of risks associated with security to the organization and sit down and can step through them and their implications with the CEO or an executive security counselor or what have you, it's a much better conversation than the head of risk, the head of cyber, and the head of physical security coming at different times to talk to different groups without a standardized way to prioritize, manage, and address those threats. So again, it's a great way to do our jobs better.
For me, the natural course would be that the executive leadership team would have a question or a set of questions that are not siloed, like the teams are, right? They wouldn't go to security and say, give me the security risk posture or security posture. Give me the physical team, security team. Give me the challenges you're facing. They have the business view. Tell me as a leadership team these things. Are we at a point where executives know how to ask that question cross silo, or what are some of the conversations sound like? I guess
I think they're getting better. Yeah. I think they know what they don't know, and they're asking people to get the answers. Is the way I would look at it. For other people, it's just another G&A function that they have to have. There's just a reality to that in many cases. But most organizations have an informed board, especially public organizations or those around critical infrastructure or those that have, just call it critical jurisdictional oversight from different regulators. And so those organizations are starting to hear questions from their board about the resiliency of their people, threats to executives, threats to the company. Others are involved in different areas. When YouTube had the shooting several years ago, they did a great job in sharing what went well, what went wrong, and what they would do differently with other folks in the industry. So you saw other social media companies, competitors, actually listening and learning and doing certain things. So you see this industry by industry by industry many times. Unfortunately, some of it pops up when there's a negative impact event. We saw that a couple of years ago, with the shooting in New York. And so, that industry took a clear and different view and learned. But to answer your question, yeah, I think people are asking the right questions. And one of them is, what's the right level of security for the threat to the business and the type of people that we have working for us? So I think that's one. The second one is how do we care for our employees when they're working on our behalf around the globe? I mean, think about how many people this week happen to be working somewhere in the Middle East for their organization and found themselves in a tough situation. Do we have the ability to provide the capability to remove our people as necessary, protect them, facilitate transport, get medical evacuation if they need it, and all those things? And people are seeing this part of due care. And the last component I would say that people are learning well is, do we have the right organizational structure, right? Are we set up to succeed? Most informed CEOs and general counsels I talk to don't have the knee-jerk reaction. They're taking a step back and saying, how do we measure the risk, apply a lens that's appropriate for our organization and that we can carry forward and continue to, do that view and make those right decisions. And I think that's a great approach.
Yeah. And I remember it was around the time of the pandemic, and there was a lot of, I'll just say, unrest here a number of years back with demonstrations and protests and whatnot. I was speaking with a security leader at one of the large banks here in the U.S., and she was describing this need to not just protect the banking systems, but to protect the banking people. She wanted to ensure that her employees at the bank were safe online, but also at home, because they were all working from home and perhaps in areas where there was unrest as well. And so they took this total view of how do we protect our employees digitally and from a cyber perspective, but also from a physical and even a health perspective when you tie the COVID stuff into that. It was an interesting conversation I had with her a couple of times, and I'm wondering, it doesn't seem like a lot of organizations have that view, right? There's the system, the person gets rights to access that system, and that's the stuff we're going to protect. And we'll give them health insurance, but that's the extent of the additional care we provide. And unless you're an executive, then maybe you get some detail to if you're traveling into a bad place or a risky place, and we might monitor your stuff online to make sure you're not being targeted for ransomware, extortion, or whatever. But where do we sit in terms of kind of softening things from the pure tech perspective to really understanding and caring about our people?
So I believe that the best in class companies that do this do it well with a risk lens, but a broader discussion on employee protection, not just executive protection. That doesn't mean have a bodyguard for every employee. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is have the conscious and capability to understand the environments that the people work in and where they live, and have programs that provide a level of continuity and capability that ensures that their employees are safe, the best that the company can provide. I think that's number one. And I'll give a couple examples of that in a second. And the second part of that is when there is a higher level of threat against an executive, a threat against a key employee, or a key employee who would be targeted because, quote unquote, they have the keys to the kingdom, or they are the only people that understand a very sensitive part of the business, is that the business takes a special view of that and understands that the employee's ecosystem is not within the four walls of the building of the office that they operate in, but rather it is part of their home life. What we call their total life and how they operate and the risks on their family and their home and other things. And they take an approach with higher risk issues, and whether they be episodic or they be permanent because of an individual's perspective, that they offer a reasonable level of due care and assistance to ensure that they have the necessary help that the company has put them in because of the position that they do. That's kind of in that area. Now, getting back to the employee area, I'll give you some pragmatic views of this. Maybe an organization has a capability that's watching for major events in large populous areas that their employees live in. Maybe they have, a branch in New York, a branch in Nashville, a branch in Atlanta, a branch in the Bay Area, whatever it may be. And their threat intel group or their employee protection teams monitor for significant events. And so not just when do they have a fire in the building are they sending out an "Are you okay?" When there is something in a geographical region that impacts a significant employee level, they send out "Are you okay?" Or maybe it's everyone. Then they have some great automation in play that says, "Hey, I know you live within 2 miles and you're a work from home employee of, this major, fire at a petroleum. Are you okay?" And then have assistance and operations available to help those out, whether they're through third parties or through their own internal managed service. That's great. Now, I happen to had worked in the past for a large multinational that specialized in human capital management and technology that focused on making sure that their people were up and able to help and support their customers. And so they had a massive capability initiative to be able to roll out kind of in a FEMA mode when something major happened, a hurricane or, a massive disaster, to go into those areas, set up capabilities to get their people out of harm's way, get them to a location that they and their families were safe, and get operations back up and running. And it wasn't just about the business getting up and running. It's making sure their people and their families were safe and they were able to do their jobs in a safe location. And so then the two helped each other. And I know the employees were really appreciative of that. And so were the clients. So that's one example. But I think there's two sides to that coin.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a few minutes left here, and I want to kind of bring this back to the security leaders who listen to this, and perhaps maybe even some of the practitioners who may or may not see things in logs that might make them think, it didn't trigger anything from a tech security perspective, but now that I'm hearing this conversation, perhaps there's an employee human perspective we should be looking at as well. So some thoughts and comments for CSOs, CISOs that may be thinking about this area and may not know how to approach it with their ELT. And I don't know, are there ways to tap into the board perhaps to make some change here as well?
Let me start at the easiest level.
Okay.
Maybe it's not a segmentation in a converged program. Maybe it's a shared program. Right? Maybe we become service providers to each other. There's a CISO on one side and a director of corporate security or a CSO on the other side. And the CISO provides engineering and threat intel platform services. Maybe there's an opportunity for the CSO and CISO to marry up risk and threat services from a prioritization together as they go in and look at these things. Maybe there are opportunities for the organization to leverage executives going across each side so they have more rounded teams is often one of the things that they can do frequently. And I see really great leaders and executives coming from cross programs. So that's number one. Number two is, start thinking about what your business needs, where they feel gaps. They're going to tell you. I mean, this is nothing new. This is something that I think we hear often and don't understand it. So have an open conversation with your leadership. Have an open conversation with your CEO or whomever, and ask, are you getting everything you want? Do you think that security, risk, and privacy and physical security can be providing more? And if so, what? And then do a planning session. Sit back and say, okay, if I'm going to jump into this, what are the things the business is asking for? How does it help our go-to-market, our customers, our employees, and our shareholders? And then do a crawl, walk, run view. Get someone who's done it before and sit back and say, what are the things I can do with existing people, existing programs? What are short-term things that we can do as an organization to plan for a next step to create the level of service capability that they want? And then start talking about the importance of convergence and how to have a standard management umbrella, risk view, and service delivery and financial model that makes sense for your business. I think that's kind of the best way to start.
Yeah. This is spurred by a post that you made on LinkedIn, and I love following what you put up there. And so I'll link to that article / post in the show notes, and hope everybody connects with you and follows along with all the other stuff that you put out there. It's good to see it, and thanks for giving back to the community.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me. I'm glad it caught your eye, and happy to always have these chats with you. So thanks so much for having the podcast.
Likewise, I appreciate you taking the time. And thanks everybody for listening and watching this episode of Redefining Cybersecurity. Hopefully open your mind a little bit more like it did for me, and get you to think a bit and perhaps take some actions to change how we approach cybersecurity in our organization. Thanks again, Roland. Thanks, everybody. Stay tuned for more.
RSAC 2026 Conference, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. Be there March 23rd through March 26th. Secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG26.